Welcome, everyone, to Hazing Crimes, the podcast. We're here today. It's September of 2023, and this month is very, very difficult for our family and the foundation, because this is the month that all the schools that are involved in Greek life are in a position where they're starting to rush. And what rush means is they're out there trying to have new members join their organization. And as part of that, then they learn about which organization they're going to join, which fraternity, which sorority. And as part of that, they have to learn certain things about that particular organization. And they go through a process, and that process includes hazing. And unfortunately, in a situation with Stone Foltz, he went through that same process, and he went through a grooming process that ended with his life. So we're going to talk today with Jay Richardson, who knew Stone, and talk to him about the ideas about a parent who's been through this to try to help other parents and other students. So with that, thanks, Jay, for joining us. He's the father of two. His daughter is a current college student at the University of Findlay. His son and Stone were best friends. Stone was like a second son to him. He's married to Jenny for over 28 years, and they live in Central Ohio. He's honored to serve on the I Am Stone Foltz Foundation board and educate students and parents about alcohol consumption, alcohol overdose, and alcohol-related hazing. He has a degree from Kent State. It's in aerospace, and he's employed in the specialty chemical market. Thanks, Jay, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I know I kind of fumbled around on your introduction. I know that you and Stone were pretty close. Maybe you can just tell a little bit about what it was like in your relationship with him and what his death meant to you. Sure. And how it impacted you.
You know, I had the opportunity to live next to the Foltz family while Stone was growing up. And so I saw him from a little boy all the way to a man heading off to college. And so I get to see him all throughout his life. My son, Jake, and Stone were about a year apart, and they were constantly together, had a ton in common. If the boys weren't at my house, they were over at Corey and Sherry's house. And so it was like a blended family, if you will. The kids went as they pleased in and out of each other's homes. And so really got to know Stone, like I said, or like you said in the bio, he was like a second son to me, and just really enjoyed, hanging out with Stone as he was growing up. He was very close to Alexa as well. They were super tight friends, and he was always looking out. Stone was always looking out for Alexa, and just a super relationship between all of our kids.
Okay, great. And when you heard about what happened to him, were you surprised by the fact that he was joining a fraternity and all of this had happened to him? I mean, what part of that did you know about, since he would come home and spend time with your family?
Sure. We had talked to Stone a little bit about joining the fraternity when he was a freshman, and he came home and, was talking about the possibility. And I wasn't part of Greek life, so I didn't have any experiences to share with him. But to me, it was kind of a surprise, because Stone was his own man. And so the fact that he wanted to join and fall in line with a fraternity, it just didn't make sense to me. But, whatever he wanted to do, we would support him and talk through it. So then when ultimately he decided he was going to rush for Pike, I didn't know what to expect. And probably like a lot of parents or friends of people that are going to college, you've seen the movies about frat parties and things like that, but do you really understand what frat life is? And more specifically, what rush looks like, and even more specifically, what hazing looks like. And those were never things that were part of our thought process or our vocabulary. And so when he decided he was going to rush a fraternity, I was figuring, he's going to be polo shirts and, riding around in a convertible and having toga parties. Never did I imagine we would be, 2 years later, part of a anti-hazing foundation.
Yeah, just you talking through that kind of brings a lot of emotion, right? It's still very raw. And I think people think that, after you lose somebody, that it's They look at the clock and the calendar and they say, it's been a long time. So what's your problem?
Right.
But the fact that I think that we're living this every single day and trying to save lives by explaining that to others, I think the wounds are always going to be open. How did you and your family deal with that?
Yeah, it was super tough for us, especially as I mentioned. Jake and Stone were best friends. Jake died in 2018 in a car crash, and so we lived through that. We knew what the loss of a child felt like. No one should feel that. But as Jenny and I were dealing with grief, one of the things that we were hoping is that nobody we knew would ever have to go through anything like this. And then to have it be Stone, to have it be someone that we were so close to, and then to be able to recognize that same look of despair that I saw on Jenny's face, now on Sherry's face. And then, of course, as a dad living through it, now having to watch Corey live through this, and then watching Lex live through it, and then knowing that Jers was going to be right there where Lex was. All of those things were hard. And then compound that with, as close as we are, the Fultz family lived through our loss as well. So you're looking at it and saying, boy, how do two families that are so close have to deal with so much? And so it's unbelievable, the grief, the pain. And you're absolutely right. People will look at it and say, well, Jake's been gone for 5 years. Are you over it yet? Well, truly, as parents, we never get over this. But what we can do is we can help others. And we can't take care of Jake. We can't take care of Stone. Mm-hmm. But much like Sherry promised Stone, we can help others make sure this doesn't happen again. So that explains the passion that we all have for this foundation, for the cause, because we can't help Stone, but we can help to make sure that no other family has to live through what we've been living through.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better. So before Stone and the tragedy there, did you know much about hazing? Did you realize it was still going on? And how would you define it to a Jersey at the age of 10 who didn't understand what was going on? I mean, how would you kind of describe that now?
I think hazing is a lot like a lot of crimes that you hear about. Until it happens to you or close to you, you watch the news and say, oh, that's really horrible. But it doesn't hit home until it hits home. And so did I have an understanding of hazing? Yes, I had an understanding of hazing, and my thoughts on hazing, or when an organization or a person forces you to do something against your will as part of belonging or part of some kind of entrance into a club or an organization. In the bio, you talked about my experience as a softball coach. I coached high school girls, college age girls. And you look at hazing as part of sports. Well, we never had it in any of our teams, but certainly it's in the news and it's happening. And that's probably where we're most familiar with the conversation, is from those sports. In some of the training to become a coach, they talk to you about duty to report. But if I were explaining it to somebody Jersey's age, it's, hey, if somebody's asking you, an adult or a peer, another student is asking you to do something that you don't think is right so that you can belong to part of some group or club, you're being hazed, even if it seems extremely minor.
That's a great way of putting it. I think one of the things that surprises me the most is, I guess over the last couple of years, we've learned that this starts in the high school space, right? Even potentially middle school. As you know, there's been a couple situations in the news lately, right? Bowling Green State University last week. Obviously, that's where Stone's scenario happened. And we're going to go speak up there in a couple of days. And right. You kind of look at it and go, that's the home of Stone. Right. And of all of the universities that should know better, it should be that one. They should be the most informed. And that happened in hockey, right? So we're talking athletics. Northwestern, right? The whole situation up there. But then there was another one just this past week, and it's Boston College, swimming and diving teams, right? So a lot of people think of it as just hazing, and that word is a frat party. It's a sorority thing that went wrong. But what they fail to understand is that my belief is that this starts in athletics when they're in the high school space. And because of that, I believe that when they get to college, they're already used to it and they kind of expect something. Do they expect it to be at this degree? I don't know. But with your experience with coaching, you coached girls softball, right?
Correct.
Did you run into a situation where you knew that was happening with other groups, other teams, or anything along those lines?
No, at our level, we didn't see it. And when you look at the level in which we were coaching, there was always an extreme amount of adult supervision. So you had adults that were out there that were part of the teams. So they had very little time to interact without adult supervision. So somebody who was responsible. And when you look at some of these examples that we're talking about, either in athletics, in the high school or middle school level, a lot of this comes from either coaches that turn a blind eye or when there's too much time when the kids are in charge and they think these things that are just innocent or it starts really small, then it continues to escalate. And you look at where we're at today. We can't even watch full TV programs. We want the condensed version on YouTube. We can't even watch YouTube. We want shorts. Yeah. And so it kind of talks to this enhanced society or the speed of society that we have. When you look at, some of the Jim Belushi frat movies, it was, hey, how many low alcohol content beers can you drink and can you chug this? And now it's, how do we go right to, Everclear, straight alcohol? And it's not about an experience. It's just all about going to the max. Everything is extreme. The challenge then is you've got everything going to extreme with no adult supervision. Okay, in college, they're adults, but they're not adults. No. So you've got no adult supervision. And as part of us growing up, you're not allowed to drink until you're 21, right? Well, right. We know that's happening in high school. We know it's happening in colleges, but because you are not allowed, nobody's providing the education. So it's one of the reasons that we're doing the Alcohol 101 piece is because we want them to realize, hey, there's chemistry out there and you need to start thinking of this as an overdose, right, just as you would any other illicit drug.
That's a great point. I think the idea for us to get into high schools to be able to talk about that, the alcohol component is really important, regardless of hazing.
Right.
Right. I think that what we're seeing are more and more young people drinking, right, for whatever reason. You also have this digital aspect. So I read an article where they were talking about digital hazing. And I had the conversation with one of the leaders at Bowling Green about it. And I'm like, how do you even manage through that? And they're like, that's a 24/7 thing. And he said, how do you even get access to it?
Right.
Right. So that's what happened in Stone's case too, right? Situation where a lot of social media, a lot of videos were taken. Unfortunately, we saw a lot of that content. And I think that as parents are watching their children grow up, based on, I've never had children, Sherry and Corey's children are my children, but based on being a parent, what would you advise a parent today trying to teach their children about alcohol, about what potential hazing is, because they're probably getting hazed in high school? How do you get them to talk about that? One of the things we talk about is start the conversation.
Right.
But I'm curious as a parent, what your thoughts would be on that.
I think we have to have the conversations and we have to be able to address some of these tough subjects with truth. And so it's sitting down and saying, hey, You're heading off to college now. Life looks different. And this is what life looks like. And bring up the topics in the news, especially everybody here in Central Ohio, all of the people that Stone knew. But Stone's case is a great example that went national. Use that story. Right. Sit down. We're here because we're trying to make sure nobody else goes through that. These parents can be part of that solution. Use the story. Sit down. Listen to the broadcasts that are on our website. Listen to the messaging. Help the students understand that you're going to find yourself in scenarios that you never found yourself in before. You didn't have this experience. You grew up in a small rural high school. Even if you grew up in a big city high school, you're going to experience things in college that you never experienced before. And here are some of the dangers. And as a parent, you know that a lot of this is going to fall on deaf ears because it's mom and dad talking.
Right.
Talk to your friends' kids, because they're more likely to listen to you than their own parents. And at the same time, make sure that they can sit down and listen to some of the messaging that is on our website, because you get to listen to Maddie speak and you get to listen from a point of view of another college student. So a peer to your son or daughter who's headed off to school. And at the same time, do your own due diligence. If they're going to Bowling Green, or they're going to Kent State, or they're going to Ohio State, Google Ohio State and hazing and read about it, and then sit down and review those things with them. Every college-age kid I know is hearing Stone's story now, whether they want to or not, because, again, we're here to save lives. That's the only reason that we're out there providing messages. And so we care so much about these kids. They have to listen to the message.
I think that's a good point. We're going to actually post out there the Alcohol 101 simulation that Corey does, with the hopes that when they see the volume of what Stone was required to drink and at what point his body would have shut down, I think it resonates when we do it in person. But we can't get to every college in the United States, right? So we're going to publish that. And I know it may seem really basic and simple, but I think it's a great way for a parent to have a conversation with a student, right? And be able to talk through that. I think it's quite interesting when we do the alcohol piece that you do in our speaking engagements, and you ask the simple question about, which one has more alcohol? And the way that the students respond is quite interesting. Some adults too, right? They don't really understand how much alcohol is in each of those different items. And drinking bourbon, the athletes are doing it because it's less calories, right? Less carbs. Back in our day, it was like we mentioned, it's low alcohol beer, right?
Right.
I'm sure that's what Sherry thought when she had heard that he had to drink. Why would he drink bourbon? He doesn't drink bourbon.
Right.
And I think those conversations just need to be had. Have it at the dinner, sit down and have dinner, right? Just talk about it. Or like you said, pull our video, sit down, have a conversation.
We know that the kids are multimedia, so they're going to hear some of what you say, but put Corey's voice on the screen. Let Corey be the bad guy in the video, and let Corey illustrate for your son or daughter what Stone went through. There's visuals there. They're going to be able to see it. They're going to be able to see that point of no return that Stone obviously crossed, and hopefully help them understand they aren't invincible. As they grow up, there's no fear. We'll have no issues. Clearly, that's not the case. When you look at social norms, we've done a lot to educate kids and parents on drug abuse.
Yes.
You remember when we were growing up, the eggs in the frying pan. This is your brain on drugs. Okay, so we got beyond all that and we started educating. We were educating high school kids. Where did you see that? It was on MTV. Mm-hmm. You saw it at the venue that was going to high school kids. But because alcohol is socially acceptable, we're not going to talk about that. They're not old enough yet. Well, they're old enough because clearly they're doing it. And so we need to make sure that we're providing that same kind of this is your brain on drugs education, and then help them understand that, hey, there are limits here.
Right.
And you need to understand what those limits are, and you need to be able to understand the warning signs. Okay, so maybe your son or daughter is very responsible and isn't going to find themselves in a situation where they've had too much to consume. They could easily be coerced into doing it, but chances are, if it's not them, they're going to be in a large room where somebody is, and somebody is overserved, and they might miss the warning signs of, hey, now's time for me to step in. I've got to help DJ before this becomes a critical situation.
And so that takes me to the question, as I watched Stone grow up, right, I never thought I had to have a conversation about, hey, if somebody gives you a bottle of alcohol or you try to drink a bottle of alcohol, it can and will kill you.
Right.
I look back on that, right? And I think that now AJ knows, now Jersey knows, right? But unfortunately, the price they had to pay for that knowledge is way too great. I think it's important that we have that conversation and just be as blunt as we possibly can.
Right.
And the other thing I think is really important that Jersey actually had the other day, which was, if you participate and you're participating in the hazing or you're participating in the alcohol abuse and something bad happens, she said, you're to blame too.
That's right. So
what about a bystander? I mean, how would you teach your kids about being a bystander that gets involved?
One of the things that the kids are really good at is anything that's on their phone. Digitally, they've got it under control, right? So they know that they're not going to participate in drinking and driving, because why would you? You can pull up your phone. There's an Uber app. It's the same kind of mentality. If you see some of this stuff going on, just like if you were drinking, you would call Uber. You're doing the safe thing. It's got to be that same mentality. Would I call Uber for DJ? Then I better get some help because something is going on. And so they need to recognize that if they're going out as a group, somebody has to be the babysitter that night. Somebody's paying attention, somebody's watching, and they're to make sure nobody gets left behind.
You mentioned Uber, right? And it becomes something that they can tap and they can go get a ride home. I think the fear that they have is this idea that somebody's going to get in trouble. How do you teach the balance between worrying about getting in trouble, whatever that might mean, versus potentially someone losing their life?
Sure. Obviously, there's the loss of life. And so we want to respect each other and take care of each other. And so if that's not intrinsic enough to say I need to call for help because, DJ's health is in jeopardy here. If it's not that, then go back and think about the trouble and say, okay, we may get in a little bit of trouble because we're consuming alcohol. But if something happens to DJ and none of us do anything, you're going to jail. And so look at it from that perspective, a little bit of trouble versus lots of trouble if the intrinsic thing isn't working for you to make that call.
That's a great point. When I was researching the Boston College situation, one of the scenarios that they're still investigating it, and it's obviously still an alleged hazing situation, but one of the things that they are investigating is this, where they made the younger players had an off-campus party, right, and forced them to drink large amounts of alcohol until they would throw up. Then what they did is they made them throw up in a bag and carry that bag around their neck the rest of the night. And you think about that and go, what fun is any of that?
Right.
Right? What is driving that type of mentality? And to your point, getting in trouble. In we talk about the law, right, and the penalties associated with hazing. There's still several states out there that don't have any laws against it. which still blows my mind now. In Ohio, it's now a felony. And in Massachusetts, unfortunately, it's just a misdemeanor. So the most anybody can get anything in that state would be misdemeanor charges with a maximum of $3,000 fine and potentially a little bit of jail time, up to a year max. The pushback that I've received on putting more penalties in place is that, you're just handcuffing everybody, right? How do you manage through that? How do you control that? But I don't know what other solution there is. If we don't have those penalties in place, when does this ever stop? When do kids just realize that this freedom that they have is so precious, but you can't destroy somebody else's life?
I think we've got to continue to make the laws strict and enforce the laws. And that is not going to necessarily solve all the problems,
right,
but it's definitely going to carry the messaging. And so when we're seeing people take action with like the Northwestern scenario, and we're seeing Boston College take action. So we're seeing it hit the news. We're seeing it then take legal action. Now more people are digging into it. It used to be boys will be boys. That was
right,
kind of the excuse. Now the media is paying attention, and we've got to use the media, and the media along with those penalties is going to play out on the news. So we've got to start making sure that more and more people are aware. More and more people understand what hazing is. What does that look like? And so if you talk about some other crime, murder, everybody's pretty aware of what that is. But hazing, that's why you asked me in the beginning, what's
right,
my definition?
That's right.
Look it up, because you probably don't know. Well, what this does is it continues to provide that education. But the change really has to come from, you're right, probably not the laws. That's a vessel and it's going to help. But the change has to come from this generation.
That's right.
This generation can be the change agent that says, you know what? You want me to drink until I puke and then put that in a bag and then potentially drink that bag later? That's stupid. I'm not doing that. And oh, by the way, that's illegal. And the rest of you guys shouldn't be doing that either. And if one person steps up in the group, the rest of the group is going to resist as well. But if everybody falls in line, then the abuse just continues to escalate until worse things happen. And so that's really coming upon this generation to say, be leaders. Don't subject yourself to this nonsense. You don't need to be part of that group if that's
right,
part of the requirement. And I think there's really an opportunity for this generation specifically, because you look at all of the other social injustices that they're addressing.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can address those topics, they can address this topic.
I think it's a great point. It's, quite interesting, back to your point about how somebody's standing up, right? And taking that, having the courage to say that I'm not participating and I'm not doing that, and we're going to go get help. Everybody believes, what I've been learning is that everybody, student-wise, believes that they're the only one that thinks that. And so they have a tendency not to stand up. Instead, they've got to think the opposite. You're all in the same situation when you're a freshman coming onto that college campus. You are in the same boat on everything. So don't think that you're different. Don't think that you're being a sissy, right? Or you're just wimping out on all that, and stand up. I think that courage has to come from this generation.
It does. And part of what you're talking about, and you mentioned it as Rush Week, really what's happening in Rush is a lot of grooming. And so when you look at the grooming that's taking place, it's, carry this brick around in your backpack. Okay, that doesn't seem so bad. And okay, you got to go help Joe do his homework. Okay, that doesn't seem so bad. And so these little things start to happen. What's happening is you are being groomed mentally for the next challenge.
That's right.
Until it becomes illegal, immoral, and unethical. And then you're like, how did I ever find myself in that situation? Because if we would have started out, hey, DJ, puke in a bag tied around your neck and drink it later,
Right.
you'd have said, see ya, I'm going to the next house.
Right.
But it's that whole grooming process, and it starts right now.
Couldn't have said it better. I think that this week is difficult for a lot of us. I think that if you're a leader on a campus, I think you're scared to death that something bad's going to happen. I don't know how you do that as a job. I've always said, Dr. Rogers up at Bowling Green State University, right? I would never want his job. I could not be responsible for what they're kids that have just received this freedom.
Right.
And they're doing illegal things. How do you stop that from being a much larger issue? I said when this happened to Stone was until a whole pledge class or multiple kids die at the same time, I don't know how much more attention they need.
Right.
And I think about this week and I think about how it needs to change. I think that one of the things we got to talk about at some point, and maybe we can do this on another episode with you, is this idea of, to me, it's a fundamental need. And it's this need to belong that drives young people to do things that they wouldn't normally do. And I'd like to be able to get into that more because I think if we can help high school seniors understand what they're going to walk into, eyes wide open, so that they're better prepared, I think we got a better shot. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'd like to have you back if you're in agreement with that, and
Sure.
we can talk about some more of these type of topics. But your students, your children are keeping it a secret, and they're not disclosing all the details about what's happening to them. Help them be safe, right? All we're doing is trying to get the word out there so that more people are more informed, so that no one else has to go through this. Our goal is to save lives. So subscribe to the podcast and please share it with at least one other person. If we can kind of get this thing moving and sharing this around the country, we have a better shot of reaching more people. So thank you.